Hello, we are live, and this will be also recorded and hosted on our YouTube tomorrow. But this is the Formula One Fans of America. This is episode 3. And since we are on the summer break and sort of at a lack of content between races, we're going to be covering the history of Formula One. And the decade that we're going with this week is the 1980s. Lots of cool stuff that went on during the 80s. You had some engine configuration changes and a battle between naturally aspirated and turbocharged engines. And before we jump into all that, though, we are going to get into some news that has been developing in the off season. So Adrian Newey is going to Aston Martin. Fabian, what do you got on this?
So yeah, it started popping really quick. It was bouncing around a couple of little spaces that I kind of rely on. And before you knew it, there was a groundswell of information coming out that was saying that Adrian Newey was going to go to Aston Martin, which kind of correlated with a comment that was made on the paddock pre-race, couple of races back, where someone made a comment that Newey was, shopping for homes in England somewhere, And sure enough, within, 30 minutes to an hour, he had about 7 different sources reporting that he inked a $100 million contract over 3 years to go to Aston Martin because Lance Stroll fanned it out, like Greg says, he fanned it out and put on a hell of a pitch. I mean, between the new facilities and just the way their campus is set up, their direct access to all things Formula One with the European connection, in that vicinity of things, his Stroll's ability to pitch a deal is apparently pretty unparalleled, according to some. And then the fact that there's a likelihood that his son, who's notorious for breaking things, would step away from the scene to allow this to happen, really factored into a comment that we made in one of our shows. We made a joke about, Newey will never go to Aston. I might have made that joke. Newey will never go to Aston Martin because he's not going to give Stroll cars to destroy all the time. Well, apparently he won't. Stroll won't. Lance won't have a chance to do that if this all pans out as described. And supposedly, maybe, the race weekend when we resume or shortly thereafter, in the first week of September, formal information will release about this. But it appears to be pretty legit at this point. There's nobody denying it. Not Newey, not his camp, not Aston Martin or their camp. In fact, the only things that they said around it, other than a patented and tacit yes, was that they're going to do everything they can to become championship winners. And he's not, Stroll is not looking to just win races. This guy's really focused on pursuing a championship. So he's got deep pockets and a long range plan. And when you start pulling people like Newey in, and then there's the other prospect, the second part of that whole conversation that you'll probably address in a moment. When you start pulling people like that in, then your sponsorship opportunities, increase as well. So not the fact that he's got the money. He also knows that he can bring in money to sustain this dream. And this is something that looks like is going to need some serious attention come 2025 when the season starts. And, and there are cars out there and they've got Newey, under the hood, literally in the shade back there, figuring it out and drawing up new designs and plans. And then with the 2026 regs coming in, man, that just kind of, I'm not even in the game, and it stokes fear in me for teams that are, that look viable for 2026. I'm like, well, might have to reshuffle the pecking order a little bit after this. So it's a pretty awesome development. It's pretty cool to see Newey still, pushing, despite the fact that he could have retired, 10 years ago. He's still got the fever in him to do this. And to take a brand like Aston Martin, of all names and brands, and possibly bring it to real prominence, it's a pretty impressive gambit on his part. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with it.
No, I agree with you. Lawrence Stroll in this dynamic, you have sort of the spoiled prince and the king.
Right.
Lawrence Stroll is a king and titan of industry, and that is clear. Like he did everything necessary to get the cash sponsorship going and kind of selling that name to a Middle Eastern country, which is sort of funny in geopolitical sense.
Right.
History of Great Britain and their imperialism across the world. But you can say nothing bad about Lawrence Stroll's business sense and acumen. And this team, if this pans out, like Aston Martin is going to be a force to be reckoned with. Jay, what do you have on this?
So from everything I'm seeing, Fabian's right, but everything else, there was no side talking on whenever he was supposedly going to Ferrari. There was no side talking whenever he was supposed to be going to Williams. I mean, whenever it comes to Newey, people keep it pretty tight-lipped, and neither side confirm or deny anything. So, I mean,
Right.
like I said, I want to say a couple episodes ago, that we could just all be seeing this completely wrong, and he could end up at V-Carb next year, and it's a way to start the salary cap. I mean, there's so much up in the air with it. It's not even funny. So we'll see. Until I see an actual ink on paper, I'm not believing anything. And it's that simple. As far as Max goes going to there, if they wouldn't have just re-signed Stroll to a 2-year deal, which is the first time that they've done that to him in his entire tenure with the team, I don't necessarily know if I see him moving off either. But then again, one of the things I did see with the Newey situation is that he has a ton of input. And if he has that much input, is it who the driver is going to be? Because, I mean, I know Honda's sitting there breathing down Aston Martin's neck. Aramco is as well. And they're like, you guys need to get rid of him or we're not going to be able to do anything. But Alonso is only signed till the end of 25, maybe 26. I can't remember right now off the top of my head. I'd have to look. And then he goes into an ambassador role. So you could see Stroll and Verstappen being teammates. Like, you just don't know how it's going to play out.
No, very true. I just really want this to happen. I think that's just like personal stuff. I just really want to see Newey go, and I want to see. You kind of stole my segue, but I want to see Max there too. I want to see Aston Martin come and just completely disrupt and throw a wrench into everything. It just makes the sport and the viewing of all this all that much more exciting when you have that sort of kind of team disruption and dynamic. And we get to watch one of the greatest drivers go to a very well-funded team that's going to give him the entire world and set him up to set up a car exactly the way he wants with Adrian Newey. Like you couldn't piece together a better recipe for Max and for all parties involved. He'd get back to domination, sort of have the Lewis Hamilton catering, if we can call it that he enjoyed with Mercedes. And so I think that would be fun. Speaking of Mercedes, Kimi Antonelli going to Mercedes from the looks of all things. Going to be awesome for him if he can handle and sustain the pressure. I am fearful that this is going to be a mistake that we've seen made far too many times. And no matter how prodigious he may be with all of his talent, so is all the other kids that have come into F1 way too soon and way too early. And it's a flip of the coin of whether you can handle the pressure at that age or not. And I don't know. I think even the most confident and competent people can buckle under the weight of the world. Really, you have your entire country behind you. You have hundreds of millions of dollars riding on your performance here. It's to a level that people don't really realize. And unless you're like the president of a country, it's hard to imagine this sort of pressure. I say that, somewhat in jest, but honestly, unless you've been in a position where hundreds of millions of dollars are riding on a performance, I don't know what more pressure you can have, and the entire support of your nation. It's like being an Olympic athlete and having to compete 10 months out of the year. It's wild the amount of pressure that gets put on somebody that's 18, 19, 20 years old before your frontal lobe is even fully developed as a man between 24 and 25. Like, come on. Who amongst us can deal and tolerate with that? And it just, I believe like we should raise the age of the super license to at least 21. I think we're getting off a little bit too soon here, throwing these 18-year-old kids in. Similar parallels like the NBA. So before I keep rambling on too much about that, Fabian, what do you got?
Well, that was another one that I was tracking pretty hard. I kind of jumped out early on it, probably when we were all first starting to get together, and was, playing with the rumor mill on that, which, it's weird how rumors work. Sometimes they pop out and they're just utterly ridiculous, and you look at where they're coming from and it's like, yeah, that's just clickbait stuff. And then other times there's just terminology and the way they're framed. It sounds like somebody's building a press release somewhere and somebody got their hands on it, so to speak. And you think, okay, this might be something real, possibly. And that's kind of where I was with it. I pushed a couple of little pieces out there. And then it kind of went real dark for a while. Like, it got quiet. You saw Kimi at the Grand Prix. He would show shots of him with Toto Wolff and all that. And that's all well and good. I mean, he's part of the program. But then this thing did the same thing that the Newey thing did. It hit those same pipelines, those same sources. It had a lot more context around it. It was everything but saying that the contract signed. It was like, this is going to be announced, was the next round of the Antonelli thing. So we kind of put together that brief little, minute and 30-second video clip that's on the page that shows him test driving, the W13 and saying, okay, like, we might need to be paying attention to this. As far as, him coming in, his age, the prospect of it possibly being too much pressure, and how it may impact his performance, I don't know. Certainly, anytime you're dealing with a young mind on a big stage, on a grand scale, there's the possibility of that. And, we've watched far too many super talented pop stars, rock stars, and other types of stars buckle under the pressure, suffer mental health issues, and really just fizzle out, or, and they get injured basically mentally. And that's certainly a thing that could be the case. I'm hopeful that his parents and the family structure he has around him and the team at Mercedes are really going to be focused on making sure that he's got the best tools available to him, including, counseling, support, whatever he needs, so that he can withstand what it's going to be like. Nobody on the civilian side of the world understands what that feels like. We've all maybe played some games that give us those cute little answer this question because the media said pick A, B, C, or D. That's ridiculous. It's not even close. When they stick a microphone in front of your face, when they watch you crack into a wall, they see you, snap the car out a couple times and do something that's obviously human error, they're going to pounce on that stuff because people just don't have any mercy, And I hope that this kid gets a lot of grace and a lot of mercy, and that he develops well. And you never know, he might just pop out there and just be God's gift to, Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton and others. And he may show us all that he's been ready and should have been there this year. We'll see.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see just how this trajectory lies. That's why I think, it's a coin flip, right? 50-50. Sometimes it works out and they get multiple seasons and they end up like Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, or sometimes they end up like Mick Schumacher, and, countless others, So, yeah, I hope for, goodness and grace and success for anybody in that seat, no matter what. Logan Sargent, another one, just wrong place, wrong time, got thrown into the sport just way too early. Jay, what do you have on this?
So I've heard Antonelli with multi-year deal. As far as younger drivers coming in and everything like that, he would be the second youngest at that point, more than likely, or damn close to it. The youngest obviously being Max, and then Lance Stroll. So it's going to be a toss-up on days, basically, with Lance Stroll. This list is not anything impressive for these young drivers. I'm still not 100% sold on Lando. I don't think he has what it takes mentally. Physically and driving skill, I think he does. But mentally, he gets too fucked into his own head and just done. Like, he'll get so twisted around the bend, it's not even funny. I mean, it took him, 5 years to get his first win? I think 4 or 5? I can't remember. And every other time he's had a chance, he's done a mental error where it costs him everything. I don't think Lando has what it takes to be considered a great driver. But yeah, no, the list goes Oliver Behrman, which realistically, can you really count because he went back to F2 and he was just up as a replacement driver. Jamie Alguersuari, never heard of him, and Mike Thackwell. Everybody else is about 20 years old or over. So I think it's a mistake on Mercedes' part. I would have went and tried harder for Bottas. You know he's a proven quantity. You know what he can do. He can play that wingman role to George Russell. Let him continue his racing career. Let him wear the mullet and let him show his ass as much as he wants, and he's a happy camper. So I think Mercedes is really screwing up by bringing a very young driver into this. I mean, hell, I would have even said Albon would have been a better choice. And we all know my feelings on Albon. Also, like, if you know it's going to be a year or two before you can get Antonelli into a seat proper, like, let him get the F2 because he's struggling there because Prima's car is absolute garbage this year. And it's like, let him get a year or two with the faster engine and see how he does with a better car. If you still want him in a year and a half, 2 years, bring up Mick Schumacher. Give him that chance again. Let him race a car that's worth a damn, and let's see if he lives up to his daddy's name. You know, like, there's so many variables, and I think Toto Wolff is just so blind to everything else because he did lose out on Max. And I think that is a huge thing that's just eating away at him. And he's like, well, Antonelli has a chance and Lewis Hamilton's not going to be here. And, you know, George Russell is still a decent enough driver to get us through everything. And I really think it's a bad choice. And I really think Antonelli is too young to come up. And I think he's going to fizzle out just like every other superstar F2 driver, F3 driver, whatever. Because like you said, Rich, look what happened to Logan Sargent. Logan Sargent was damn good in F3. He skipped F3 to come into F1. They pulled him too early, and now it's going to cost him his career. He's going to be a great IndyCar racer next year, but it is what it is. I mean, unless if we get Andretti on the grid, then maybe we can get Logan Sargent back. But
so here's what I hate about this. Yeah, here's what I hate about this before I transition to you, Greg. Like, it shouldn't be like you get one shot. You know, like it does feel like you get one shot, and if you miss it, and it, like, Logan Sargent should be able to come back in 2 to 3 years after racing WEC or racing IndyCar and get another try with another, you know, manufacturer. It just, for whatever reason, because of the sport and the way the business in F1 works, like, that's just not a progression or a path that you seem to be able to take. You might be able to sit out for like 1 or 2 seasons and come back, but that's already if you've had an established career, not a struggling career. And so well, maybe then correct me where I am wrong, but it seems like far more likely where you get one shot.
No, Magnussen and Hulkenberg, this is on their second shots with Haas even.
Yes, they called them back, but they had both been in F1 for multiple seasons, not 1 or 2 initial seasons, and then you're done with the entire sport, like a Logan Sargent type career or a Mick Schumacher type career. Like, I don't know if we'll be able to see Mick Schumacher come back to F1, and we certainly wouldn't if didn't have his father's name, right? He would end up discarded like many other 1-2 year, 3 years tops, and then you get thrown away. Alex Albon could have easily been cast aside. Yuki Tsunoda could have been cast aside. And that's why I say it's like a coin flip sometimes with these younger drivers. If you get to your 4th, 5th, 6th season and start to develop as a driver and prove who you are, but sometimes you only get two seasons or a season and a half or even less, and then you're done with the sport. And so it's just the progression and the way that it works. But Gray, go ahead.
Well, I think the challenge everybody's up against is the very limited grid, right? So there's a ton of money and it's poured into just 20 spots. And I think that's why we see people get such limited utility out of their skills, right? So if they don't produce immediately, everyone's like, well, time to move on to the next one, like really short attention spans, but they know they have some good backups, right? So when a rookie bonks, they can just turn to somebody like a Magnussen or any of the other guys that have done years on the grid and can just be thrown into some spot, like someone who doesn't have a big name title behind them. I'm going to agree that the kids are too young for a number of reasons. Probably the best analogy I can come up with is, we don't use kids as jockeys, despite the fact that they're appropriately sized. And we don't do that because it's freaking dangerous. Motor racing is extremely adrenaline filled. Kids have no idea what they're throwing themselves at. And death is kind of right around the corner. Had it not been for the halo and modern monocoques, like we'd have a lot more fatalities. And we're going to talk about some of those dangers later when we get into the 80s cars. But I do agree the kids should be bumped back. Like, sorry, everybody who's in the pipeline, but 21's now the age, and have a nice day. Just make that the firm rule. That it would also, I think, raise the level of competition. Because if you look back at the 80s, like we're going to talk about a little bit, like there's no kids. It was all adults. Now, granted, nowadays, anybody who wants to be in motor racing has a family behind them. They have some sponsorship behind them, and they know we got to get them in there as soon as possible. Everyone's in this rush, and a reset probably needs to happen. Like, let's go back, make it 21. That way, when you get people in here, there's less immediate failure because they've honed their craft over time. It will take more money and more backing to keep these people in motorsports. But if all of the other segments go, F1 is now age 21. Okay, cool. F2 is now age 18 or 19. And F3 is now age 16 or whatever it is. That way, as kids come up through karting, they do more time. They can win more championships. They can do all kinds of things, but it will cost more money. And maybe they get their education first so that when their time in F1 gets blown out, they don't have to be like, I'm going to go back and get my MBA now. Well, they might already have it by the time they get to F1. Who knows? So, yeah, I agree. Antonelli's going to be a risk, but he's going to be a risk like a lot of other people. And I think we will know if he's good or not because he will already have a reasonable chassis. It won't be one of those cases where, like with Williams, oh, sorry, yeah, this was your starter kit, but it didn't work out because you couldn't figure it out. Yep, that happens. Like even Albon's wrecking cars, and we know he's a good driver, right? Yuki, great driver. We will never know if he's truly great because he's tied to Honda money. He's never going to land that like primo ride because that's where his sponsorship's coming from. I think that's why Red Bull hasn't pushed him up. So yeah, and that's my take on it.
Good point.
It's a shame not everybody's getting the fair shake over.
So that's a really, really good wrap up on that, though, and that's fair. I like the way you think about it. You brought up some points that I didn't really consider. I really like the idea of them tiering it more and there being a definitive structure around it, because there's science behind the mind of the development of the brain, and we know how long it takes for it to be fully developed. And so you take all those things into consideration and juxtapose it against things like jockeying and other things that are dangerous that we don't let kids do, and it just kind of makes a hell of a lot of sense. But for some reason, there's not a lot of thought around looking at it that way, and you're probably right. It probably has to do with cost.
So also, you got to remember the F2 championship has the rule that if you win, you're out of F2 completely.
Cool, change it.
So I don't disagree, but have you seen them try to change rules? It never works out well. Because one team is always going to complain that, well, we won't get our fair shake at it because X, Y, and Z driver, if he can stay here for 3 years, that's a whole regulation set, and we're out generational talent now. And that's what it's going to boil down to.
Wow.
The FIA messes and plays with regulations constantly and consistently. and we're going to segue into that in a little bit. But before we do, there's some news about Alpine's engine choice and a complicated algorithm with, well, it's not really an algorithm, it's an equation. It's algorithmic like for if Renault stops supplying engines to Alpine, who there would be a requirement for them to have an engine. Jay, jump in on here and help me out.
Okay, so I don't know much on the actual what they're choosing. I haven't really had a chance to read up on anything like that. I know the most likely is going to be Mercedes, simply because Mercedes is losing Aston Martin in 2026, so it makes sense for them to pick it up. But the way that the regulation is written, before Renault can step out of F1, their supplied teams have to find an engine manufacturer. So it throws another weird curve to another rule, which is out of all of the current F1 engine manufacturers, you have to have everybody supplying an engine to a team, obviously. Now, whoever is supplying the least amount of engines to teams are the ones that will pick up if no other team agrees to work with Alpine. So Mercedes is obviously out because I think they have 3 or 4, even with Aston Martin leaving. Red Bull's out because they supply 2 teams already. Ferrari also supplies 2 teams. And then you have the Honda engines that Aston Martin's going to be using, which will only be supplied to 1 team. So therefore, by rule, if Alpine doesn't reach an agreement with anyone else, they have to use Honda engines, which is huge because Honda does not want to work with anybody but Aston Martin. So I don't know how much of a wrench it'll throw into the Honda relationship at that point, which could be interesting.
I'm just happy that Ford's going to be making engines again. Well, okay, so both of you are throwing quotation marks up. Go ahead and elaborate there.
You know you're screwed. We're not cursing on this part. You know you're screwed. Jay and I are like, yeah. So Honda obviously leaves a lot of intellectual property with Red Bull Racing powertrains, and as things progress through the years, less and less of that will be Honda's doing, right? So they've hired a lot of people on. Honda's leaving people on. They're just swapping badges, changing T-shirts over to Red Bull. And as Ford comes in, they're obviously going to infuse more of that. So Red Bull's got the best of every world. So not only did they end up with the fastest engine because we had to let them get faster because they were too slow, which nobody gave Renault the option to do that. But now they also have one of the biggest powerhouses of modern cars, modern automotive culture coming in to say, okay, well, we have this analytic capability and we know this stuff about whatever engines, and they're gonna pump their stuff in there. So I see Red Bull's powertrain unit being far better than many for years to come. Right now, we can't write off Mercedes because they did it once, they'll do it again. And everybody agrees that with all their customer teams, like you're always seeing how good Mercedes is doing, and there's a ton of data that comes with that. So to bring in Jay's point about how Honda only wants to work with Aston Martin, it would be wise of them to have another team on the field, if for nothing more than just to get the data. Now, maybe nobody wants to go touch Alpine because it's a hot mess over there right now. But to say that Ford will be making engines again is slightly premature. Give it 2-3 years after their first Ford branded engines in place. Then you could start to say, okay, Ford has had some effect on what's happening there. But yeah, Jay.
I was actually going to say something similar. Ford may be helping build these engines, but all of the EV tech that they're going to be putting into this is all Honda. Like absolutely everything, which is 50% of the engine. And in order to get that to work, you got to think they're going to be bringing in more Honda parts than Ford parts for a while. So I don't know. Plus, the best part about those Honda engines is that they were not failing during races. That was the absolute killer of it. which was, I think, Max had his first DNF in Australia for 18 months, 19 months,
Yeah.
something like that.
And I think he did that just for fun. He was just bored. He wanted to see somebody else. He wanted to be on the finish line and celebrate with him.
Pretty much. But also, to bring up Greg's point about the Alpine is, it is an absolute shit show over there. And I do agree that it would make sense for them to pick up Alpine just for the data. However, in order to get that data, you got to keep people on the track. And let's be real here, Gasly's not the best at that half the time. And then another thing you said, and I can appreciate this, the Renault engines. Whenever Red Bull switched in 2021, they switched to Honda in 21. No, was it 20? I can't remember. Regardless, they switched from the Renault. The engine itself wasn't adapted much. Renault wanted to completely redo their entire F1 engine, and which is why Toto Wolff said no. And every other team principal is like, let them cook. Toto's like, no, screw them. Let them die. It's fine. Because now he has another customer. So I'm telling you, Toto Wolff, Sith Lord, straight up.
They had Honda engines in 2021. Yeah, definitely.
I knew they had them in 21, but I couldn't remember when the partnership actually started.
Yeah,
if it was 2020 or 2021.
That was when they started getting competitive. No, good call, and thanks for providing the clarity on the engine discussion. And Greg as well, like, Ford engines. Yes, I get it now. So let's jump into the 80s, gentlemen. So 80s cars, battle of turbo and naturally aspirated. And we saw a bunch of different changes come in. Cylinder size was limited to like 12, and I say limited loosely. Like you had flat plane 12 or like flat 12s and H12s in there. Minor changes in weight during the early 80s. 1984, we started seeing like fuel consumption limitations. You could still refuel before then, and then they started capping the fuel limitations. You had like cars going through sometimes 6 different engines in a weekend. So definitely not what we deal with today. You're on like, certain aspects of your powertrain unit, and you can fail and replace them periodically. Nothing like during the 80s. Refueling was banned in 1985. Turbocharging became mandatory in 86. And then 87, immediately after, they started allowing naturally aspirated back into the sport with different weight constraints for naturally aspirated and turbo engines. So higher weight constraints, like 500 kilograms for turbo engines versus 540 kilograms for naturally aspirated, and then unlimited fuel use for naturally aspirated motors. 89, the turbo engines got forbidden because they were doing way too well, despite shaky reliability. But they just had so much more power. It was almost unfair. The McLaren MP44, they just dominated the 80s, especially the late 80s. We're going to get into it, but McLaren was dominant with a Honda turbo engine. So let's go ahead and jump into the 1980s. We're going to go favorite race, favorite driver. I think we're doing favorite track. Fabian, we'll start with you.
So make sure I'm on. I'm going to go with Kyalami circuit in South Africa. I've got a particular affinity for making sure that Africa's got representation in Formula One. And so here was a year where they were in play. I think that was the 36th season at the time. There were 2 competitions. It was the 33rd Formula One World Championship for the drivers and the 25th for the constructors. It was one of those 16-round deals. It was won by Keke Rosberg. and the constructors was won by Ferrari. But the season opener for that was in Kelami. I think there was a driver strike going on at the time. There was all kinds of crazy stuff happening. It was also, unfortunately, the year that Giles and Riccardo Paletti died that year. The front runner suffered a career-ending accident during that season. I think it was Peroni, I believe was his name. The way those two fatalities happened impacted a motorsports journalist. This guy's name was Roebuck. He made a quote about that year. He said the 82 season was an ugly year, pockmarked by tragedy, by dissension, by greed, and yet paradoxically, it produced some of the most memorable racing ever seen. So a really interesting year for sure. The driver for me would be Andretti because he came into 3 contests that year. I think he DNF'd the last one. I don't remember what happened in his first one, but he drove for Williams in the United States Grand Prix, which was actually, I think, technically called the Toyota Grand Prix of Long Beach, California. And only 10 cars finished that race out of like however many were in there. I think there were 30-something cars. 10 cars finished, and Lauda won that race. Niki Lauda won that race. So a really interesting year, definitely a very interesting race at Kelami. And then, of course, just the season overall had a lot of really quirky things that happened in it, with Andretti showing his face for 2 different teams in one season.
No, awesome. Good memories of the 80s. Great. What were some of your favorite memories of the 80s?
For sure, the engines. Anybody who's a gearhead is like fascinated when someone says, "Yeah, we just blocked off the wastegate and let it sing." I'm like, what? So I want to highlight something from
That's awesome.
How this went down, right? So it was like turbocharging became mandatory in '86, and before that, there were lots of things blowing up. Not some, most of them were blowing up, and then they got it figured out, and all of a sudden, turbo was the thing to have, and then very quickly, within like 2 years, they were like, "Just kidding, no more turbos anymore," and that isn't the FIA being ridiculous. That's the FIA saying, "Oh, people are passing out in the pits. There's a haze, a wavy haze that's not from heat. What's going on?" They were using horrifying carcinogenics to make the fuel. There's a very specific thing called toluene, I believe it's pronounced. And holy crap, it's great. Like we talk about, oh, E85 is so great. You can advance the timing these days, and it's right at the pump. And yet toluene's what happens when a scientist is like, "I got a great idea." And the next thing you know, they've made mustard gas. It is literally the trench warfare of F1. It was horrifying. There was no way to stop the stuff. It went everywhere. Like people were just constantly having like asphyxiation issues. So that's why turbo cars went away back then. Obviously nowadays, a whole different story. But to know that, BMWs would be like, "Cool, here's your qualifying engine." And that wasn't the practice engine. That was just the one they were going to wick up to 1,500 horsepower and be like, "Have fun." As a driver, we got to remember these guys went from driving 900 horsepower in practice and then maybe 700 horsepower in the race, and they had like scramble boost options. But in qualifying, they were like, "Yeah, here's 70% more horsepower." Like, what? That's amazing to me. That blows my mind what they went through in the 80s with so many different cars. And my last point is that we talk about all the different engine types, right? But the turbos were V6s and stuff. The flat engines couldn't build good aerodynamics because there was just all this engine in the way. Same reason that Porsche race cars are now going, mid-engine as opposed to rear engine. You had gigantic engines that were just super long, right? Because they're like, hey, it displaces whatever, 3 liters or something like that. But yeah, it's like 16 fucking cylinders. Excuse my language, 16 cylinders long. And that takes up a lot of space. So packaging became a thing. Turbo cars were obviously tough on packaging, but the engines were small. And now we're starting to see what we're now experiencing, where like packaging is everything. And the cars are massive. But I think it was an amazing time because the rules had not been narrowed down to what is essentially a spec series these days with aero that is just in a box and you can do whatever you want. But then, okay, no wicker bill here. The 80s were wild. They were truly wild. And that's why we did see some of the greatest racing ever.
Exactly that too. You mentioned the size of the 12s. And so you started seeing this with one of the Ford V8s where the reason why they went with that versus a 12-cylinder was for the aerodynamics. And because with the regulations, you had a smaller, more compact engine, whereas like with a 12-cylinder, it's wider and made it harder to block off with aerodynamics. So like all of that technology, and then it went into like load bearing issues and becoming including the engine as a part of the chassis, like all kinds of technology and advancement that occurred during the 80s. Also, Greg, we can say fuck on this show.
Yes.
Yeah, we're good. I'm gonna go in. Actually, I'm gonna let Jay go ahead and hit me with your favorites of the 80s.
You didn't skip me this week? I'm so proud of you. So I'll make it quick just because the cars, everybody said everything about the cars that need to be said. Y'all forgot about 84 Monaco, though. Arguably the greatest race of all time. And that's not, then you all know how much I hate Monaco. Like, I despise Monaco. But that race in the rain was absolute insanity the entire way. There was not a dull moment in that race. Favorite driver of the era, Prost. No questions asked on that one. And this is why I've been very specific, Rich, of what the time frames are. I know. And favorite track, Watkins Glen, because it got retired in 1980.
Yeah. Glenn is
What?
big
Glenn is
cojones
incredible.
corners. Like,
Yeah.
even in stock cars, which are intended to just hammer into walls, they're afraid. So imagine guys in little aluminum monocoques. They're just, their shoulders are like hanging out and stuff. They're like elbowing barriers and whatnot, bombing around the Glen. Yeah. Frightening place.
You got to remember, the 80s really brought in the downforce. Like, towards the tail end of the 70s into the 80s, really brought that downforce in. Watkins Glen was bumpy. It was crazy. It just screwed up all of the downforce that you had, and you literally just lost everything. Now, this track is absolutely amazing throughout the rest of the time until you got to that point where these cars are now going stupid fast, need to stick to the ground, and nothing can go wrong. So, I figure it's a great track to go with.
Man, Watkins Glen and Monaco. You love chaos.
The king of
You
chaos.
know me for 20 years and you're just now getting this? Like,
No, I know. I just, you have not grown out of it. Well, I'll put it that way in 20 years.
at least some.
No, so to me, the 1980s is almost two different decades. It's with Lauda, without Lauda. Prost, like, honestly, I take my hat off to him. I will willingly admit I am firmly in the camp of Senna, and so I am adamantly against Prost. He's a French driver that had French leadership in the governing body. They were way too buddy-buddy. I believe Senna got absolutely railroaded and hosed out of a championship, and then he got banned for 6 months for what? And then unanimously, the next time they step on the track, and we're not going to get into the 1990s, we'll save it for another week, but unanimously, the infraction that he made and was disqualified for should never have been penalized and was not penalized previously. We're going to get into a debate. But so my favorite driver probably of the 1980s is Niki Lauda. I know he was my favorite driver of the 70s, but Niki Lauda, he won his 1984 championship against Prost. It was his last one, and he retired with it. It came down to the wire. That's why, honestly, I think my favorite race is Estoril in 84. That was it. And it was a feather in the cap of one of the greatest like era drivers from the 70s and then right into the 80s, and just the way to retire his career as a driver, it was to go out on top. So I just loved everything about that and that story. But Jay, let's get into it. I know you and I have differing opinions between who was a better driver between Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna.
Okay, so basics, just straight on the basics. Senna was a wild card every time he got on that track. He was very much like young Max, which all three of you have said is very dangerous and very bad for the sport. Prost was very mechanical about everything that he did. He was the polar opposite of what Senna was. He was meticulous with his driving and everything like that. Now, as far as
who was his
Japan
teammate
goes-
that maybe contributed? Who was his teammate that potentially contributed to this reputation in what you're saying?
Oh, I know exactly
What car
who
did
it
he
was.
have that made him better than Ayrton Senna? What car was he driving? Was it a car set up by
hold on.
Lauda?
Both of them won. Oh, hold on. No, I'll get to that. Don't you worry, you son of a bitch. I got you on that one. But now, both of them had beat their teammate in equal machinery. Yes or no?
So
Senna 88,
Lauda
Prost
had
in
more
89.
championships. Oh, you're talking
We're
about
talking
between
about
the two of
Senna
them?
and Prost. Yes.
Senna had
I
more
thought that's-
wins and more poles. Senna had more wins and more poles. Prost had more points and more championships because of some BS that went down in '89.
Okay. So now we all know the rules about once your car is dead on the track, it's dead on the track, correct? Now, back in the 80s, they had this lovely little thing where if you could push it and get it back onto the track for it to go, that was legal. Now, what Senna did was he went down the emergency exit chicane, correct? And then to the pits and came back out, which by the letter of the rules was the right call to disqualify him. Now we're going to get into the
Had
Honda
never
engine.
disqualified anybody before doing the same exact thing. Not even a penalty for doing the same exact thing. Nothing.
I would have to
Nothing
look
even
that up.
said. It is a well. They showed video of it and showed video of other cars and drivers doing it. So like,
Didn't James
when-
Hunt
when
get
it's a trial and everything
disqualified for the same thing in the 70s?
different track and different scenario. This wasn't
Oh
a
no,
runoff road.
this is all
this
rules. We're talking dead car.
access road.
Dead car.
Okay,
Access
but
road,
was it?
not a runoff road with a deliberately imposed chicane for you to traverse the chicane. That's what it's there for. It's not there for you to stop, turn around, and then go back in the opposite direction, which was the correction that was made the next year by another driver. So when you come back the next year and they're racing the same course and there other drivers are pointing out like, so what the fuck do you want me to do? Instead of going through the four.
Okay, I think Rich froze.
It's a great freeze too.
He
Yeah,
got so mad.
It's
He
so-
broke the
Yeah,
broadcast.
his energy
Is that for
just
his picture.
that's great. We really should. Somebody snip it.
Got it.
I'm gonna snip it.
Still
You got it?
frozen. That's fantastic. So what he was saying was it was an unfair rule application that they later clarified, and it is silly, in my opinion, even in that moment. They were like,
I think that rule still
hell
exists
no.
today, though,
I gotta,
doesn't it?
sorry, guys. I got to take a call.
That's good. You're good. So I don't know. Did they change the rule the following year?
I
Or-
don't know enough of that rule and regulation.
That's what-
like the late 80s is kind of sketchy for me because I was 6 years old. So I mean, I'm kind of,
Yeah.
but
We need to throw that on the sheet for a follow up at the start of the next
yeah,
show.
because I know for a fact that Hunt got disqualified in Silverstone. It doesn't matter the
Right.
track. It doesn't matter anything. Rules are rules. Hunt being disqualified in Silverstone, and the only reason he was reinstated at Silverstone and allowed to race is because the Brits were going to fucking riot if they didn't.
Well, if rules are
Um,
rules, Jay, why were you so upset about George Russell being DSQ'd, huh? I'm
Which time?
The
I mean, he does kind of, no, I was actually all for that as far as the weight goes.
Okay, you were cool with that?
Yes,
All right.
because the rules
All right, so
are
I'm back
rules.
on.
I was
Where
shit stirring
did I
from-
get
Me
cut off?
too.
Where did I get
I
cut
think
off?
you were You were at the beginning where you were saying there was something that made you mad about Ayrton.
I know you better than to believe you on that. Jay, where did I leave
He
off?
turned so red. He's like,
We were discussing about the rule with where he went off, and I said that I would need to look it up because I was 6 years old at that point, so my memory's a little hazy. But I'm
So
almost
you
this
call
is
yourself
a
an F1
purposely-
fan.
This was a purposefully built chicane on a runoff road. So if an incident happens on the track, you run off onto this, and then you go through a chicane to come back on. It's not there for you to stop, physically turn around, and drive into oncoming traffic to get back onto the track, which is what the FI was telling him what was necessary, what needed to happen. And so the next year, when they came to the same track, it was unanimously decided amongst the drivers that that was stupid and not what should have happened. And he shouldn't have been penalized by it because nobody was penalized by it before. So they took away his championship and then blamed the crash on him, which even if you want to debate or argue it, was not deserving of a 6-month ban. So it makes it
I don't
very
disagree on
difficult to
that.
argue. Okay, we're good there. But don't give me rules or rules when you build a chicane on a runoff road to be driven through to slow you down as a penalty for using the runoff road. And that is not apples to apples with the James Hunt thing. James Hunt was on an access road as a part of the track that he just ended up on and was a shortcut back into the pits. So I'm not even agreeing with the disqualification or like disagreeing with that disqualification. He should have been. He should have been. It's fine. In normal scenarios, in normal situations, even against his own teammate, Ayrton Senna can start from the pits and come up and challenge into second place. And whether you call it his risky driving style, you want to criticize him for that and having more DNFs than Prost, but the man can start from way, way back and come all the way to the front. And in my opinion, in many other people's opinions, if you're not looking paper for paper statistics and you're not counting on a top 6 point scoring era, Ayrton Senna is the better driver.
Whoa. Just
We are
because
talking
he
about
had to
just the
come-
80s here. Just the 80s.
I'm still talking about just the 80s. They would have been 2-2 in championships, correct? It was 1-3. It would have been 2-2, so it would have been dead even in championships. I'm talking about the 80s. I know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the 80s. It would have been 2-2 in championships.
So here's the thing. Senna was amazing across one lap. Nobody will ever
Senna
deny
with more wins and
he
more
was the Leclerc in a better car. Anyways, moving along. I'm sorry, Senna, you know my feelings on Senna. He was a phenomenal racer, arguably one of my top 3 across all the. Go ahead, Greg.
I'm gonna screw with both of you. So to say, Senna could come from the pits, yeah. The delta from the back of the field to the front of the field back then was massive, especially when you had things like, I don't know, an extra 600 horsepower push to pass. But it took a lot to drive those cars, which proves that he really was amazing. Like the lap of the gods and all the other crazy qualifyings that he put down. The guy was amazing. However, Prost didn't have to come from the pits. He wasn't busy wrecking people or flying off the track or whatever. He was more consistent. So there is a great argument here for both drivers. And us as the spectators, we're lucky to have seen that, right? And there's a lot of parallels with what we see nowadays because traditionally there's only a few different types of successful racers. There are the maniacs, the Verstappens of the world, the Ayrtons of the world, the Schumachers of the world.
Right.
And then there are the more well thought out ones. And I don't know where Raikkonen fits into that. It's like his own thing. Because there's another one who lost a couple championships. But I'll leave you two with that little tidbit.
We'll leave that to our 90s and 2000s off week, coverage. Jay, I mean, a lot of this is about emotion, and I think it is for everybody. And I think it's one of those beautiful things about the sport. is that like even on paper, I can say like he had more poles and more wins, but Prost had more points. And so who's the winner at the end of the day? And it just to Greg's point, it's the more methodical, consistent minded one. Whereas I like the guy that just goes for broke. I personify with that more so than the slow, methodical, same thing every single time type of guy.
But Niki Lauda is your favorite driver of all time.
Yes, because I admire him for being
methodical methodical motherfucker to walk the face of the planet at that point.
Because it's something that I could never be. He is someone that I could never be.
That's
Ever.
Richard's yin and yang.
And I admire that. Yes, like, yeah. So, like,
Okay,
I like both sides. Just like I loved James Hunt. James Hunt, I love Niki Lauda, but if I were driving F1, I would have been James Hunt. But I admire, respect, and like ultimately would rather be like Niki Lauda.
Yeah. So here's the other part that most people seem to forget. Honda literally came out and said, yes, we favored Senna over Prost. I can send you the article actually on that one, Rich. I'll do it later though. But
You don't need to.
that was
I
in
know this
89.
fact. I did
Yeah.
my own research for your arguments against mine.
Yes. But
Opposition
literally,
research.
so FISA coming down and favoring Prost, Honda favoring Senna. Something had to give. I mean, realistically here. And Senna.
All right,
fucked
favoritism
up
of
bad
an engine
on that
manufacturer versus favoritism of a governing body, where it's French
With
connection.
one race versus.
And you cannot deny that there is nationalism amongst Formula One. And if the governing French body is in your back seat and your teammate and rival gets banned for 6 months for an unsafe act, which is unheard of, and like how many times did Prost crash into somebody and not get any penalty? Like, come on, you can't argue they didn't have favoritism. There was corruption abound, and it's because he's a French driver with a French governing body.
Stop FIA corruption.
Regardless, just okay. Oh, you're gonna love this one, Rich. 7 times is how many times Prost crashed. 7 total.
Okay, that's not the point.
All but one was his fault.
When was he ever penalized?
Probably not.
I would assume he was penalized. Hold on.
What was he ever penalized for? I probably nothing.
Granted,
because
no,
it's
like,
French on French
I
loving.
already
You cannot
did-
deny that French connection exists.
I've already agreed with you that was bullshit.
He
Like,
was the
we both
benefactor of fucking governing body corruption. And Ayrton Senna
Boy.
was a victim.
I'm enjoying
Two
this show.
championships versus two
Okay.
championships.
Fuck.
Right,
During
baby?
the
We
end.
can just leave. We're out of here.
He's coming across the gap.
Oh,
Bullshit.
it was
Because
my
he
my
how
line.
many
It was
times-
my turn when I'm fucking a half a car behind him.
I need some popcorn now.
But who was it? Who was it fault
Do they sell
for
Twizzlers in
Lando
this
and
joint?
Max? Who was it fault for Lando and
Yeah,
Max?
it didn't matter whose fault and whose crash it was because they already fucked him out of the championship, didn't they?
There's another prime example right there, Fabian, of a driver who can cause a crash without getting a great penalty for it. Anyways,
Who, Max
so
Verstappen?
no, Lewis Hamilton. Poor Albon still probably has concussions. Anyways, no, like all bullshit aside, let's be fucking real here. Fucking both of them are phenomenal drivers. You can argue either which way that one of them deserves a championship over the other one more. And it's as simple as that. And like you said earlier, it is the passion of this sport that brings us all together. Let's be fucking real.
True.
And we can have disagreements all day long, but I'm generally right anyways. So moving along here.
Generally.
I'm joking, Rich, before you even unmute the mic. I already know. But no. I've already said that suspension was absolute bullshit. and should never have happened. However, you have to expect the fuck around and find out consequences of calling out a governing body, which is exactly what Senna did. He called them out. He said some shit.
Because he had integrity.
Oh, yeah, fuck. The integrity of killing little girls. Anyways, but they gave him the opportunity to retract his statement before issuing a penalty out or anything. Senna said, fuck you, I'll go back to Brazil and diddle little girls. I think he muted himself.
I did. I was going to say I put a little bit more respect on his name.
Don't get it twisted.
He even considered quitting the entire sport because of the politics and the bullshit. And like, this isn't something that he or anybody should be dealing with, right? But we all know better, and we commented it on the modern day. This has not changed, and it's one of those important points of why we draw back into our history. Is we can have these debates about whether the governing body was influencing the outcome of races and seasons and championships, or in like still have the same argument from a matter of years ago. Something's never seemed to change when this amount of money is involved, and there's simulations into society, or similes rather, just something to consider. When this amount of money gets involved, people start acting different. They start behaving in certain ways, and it doesn't matter how good you are and in front of the world, the performance and what's happening, you can still have your outcome changed. And I think that's why it's important that we continue to have these debates and discuss what's going on. Because again, there's parallels. I think we're getting ready to wrap, but anybody got bold predictions? Do you have any predictions for we were right, we were wrong?
Not right now. This is just the only prediction I've got is what's his nuts going to Alpine, doing, whatever. There's not going to be any major shakeups. Everybody's giving the finger to Sauber, Audi, whatever the fuck you want to call them. So it's more likely going to be Bottas staying. Joe and Sargent are both out of the sport at this point. Ricardo, being that they're keeping Sergio in the fucking seat, which I have heard now that as soon as Mexico happens, out, done.
Yeah, I heard that too.
So it'll be.
I'm going to turn the screws on you guys then. So prediction, will Checo be in the front seat, or on the front team after the Mexico Grand Prix? That's the question. I say no.
Ricciardo goes to full blown Red Bull.
Yep, he'll get a couple of race shots, and that's it. If he doesn't, maybe till the end of the season. If he doesn't keep up with Max, he's gone. Liam Lawson comes into the Red Bull seat, possibly. And then they'll bring up Hajar from the Red Bull camp, I think, because he's going to win F2. They're going to have to find something to do with him.
I say 3 races for Checo. I say 3 races for Checo before they replace him with DR3. Fabian, go ahead.
The Hajar move seems like that seems eminent to me. There's a lot of buzz, to the extent that even F1 Channel did a whole feature on him about his Spa resurgence and all that. They're laying the groundwork for that. The interesting news that popped today was the concept of Montalvo coming from IndyCar to Sauber. So you've got a 2-time IndyCar champion who's now in the conversation about going to Sauber. That's interesting to me. Because I know he's tearing it up in IndyCar and has been, to the extent that he's got 2 championships under his belt. I do know that IndyCar, obviously, it's a very different animal. They don't have power steering. Formula One does. There's all kinds of little digs that get thrown back and forth between the IndyCar F1 world. But apparently this guy's a pretty talented driver. And that his name has now popped up in the discussion as we enter the middle of the summer break is really interesting. And then that I have to look at how the dominoes fall and figure out, what does that mean for everyone else that's still around and other people who are also in the talks. But that's one to watch. We'll probably by next week have more to talk about there. And I'm going to start doing some digging and some research on that. But that looks like an interesting prospect.
All right. Yeah.
I've heard Oh, sorry, Rich.
No. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I've definitely heard interesting things about him. The only question I would really think is that I doubt he would want to move to an unproven team just yet. I could see him maybe in 26 coming over, but not for 25. I really think Audi's going to have to use a year spacer driver in order to get through.
I mean, that makes sense logically, but when it comes down to it, we'll go back to what Rich was talking about. It's always about the money and the difference in the disparity between Formula One and IndyCar drivers. Somebody just published something on this just yesterday. It's astronomical. Like the top IndyCar driver and the top F1 driver salary for Verstappen and whomever that guy is, the difference is $53 million. The number two, the difference is $26 million and so forth. So I think that it's not going to be difficult to entice a Montalvo to come to F1 if he's going to see a 200 or 300% increase in revenue. And he has his own racing teams that he produces and supports and stuff. So that gives him a lot more resources to work with to continue to build that legacy as well. And that could be the thing that would encourage him to go.
No, great points. Greg, what do you got for bowl predictions?
Real bold here. We always talk about Lance Stroll not ever moving, right? Like, because his dad owns the team, but the dad's the one guy that can move him. And if it was to get Max Verstappen, I think 100% would be like, have fun in WEC, Junior. Like, see you later, goodbye. But then to have Max and Alonso in the same team in the same year seems bad. Like, that could be the worst thing ever, because when you compare Lewis and Max, Lewis is like polite. Max is not. Like, Max versus Alonso in the same team would be a disaster on an epic proportion. So I wonder if that's really in the cards for this year. Fabi, what do you got?
I love that Chase double thumbs up because he took the words right out of my mouth. I'm like, I'd pay real money to see that. Like, I would love to see that.
Yep.
That would be.
I've said this from the beginning. I would love to see the projected trio for Le Mans: Alonso, Verstappen, Yuki. I would fucking love that till no end. That would be the most foul-mouthed bastard group of drivers to ever drive at Le Mans.
Sure.
So I'll go against you guys. I think because of Alonso's maturity and age, like, he would accept whatever role was going with the team, especially if he stayed with Aston Martin and had Max as a teammate. I mean, you shake your head, but like, honestly, like, the dude's
I'll shake my whole body at that
40+ years old. I think he would. I think he would
Alonso
know and understand and comprehend what's going on in the position he's in. I also think that, like, it would be told to him by King Stroll, like, hey, if you want to stay here, you're number two. And if you have a problem with that, then you can go elsewhere. Like,
So
they would choose Max over him.
Alonso is the special operations operator of the F1 grid. We don't even know half of what he does, right? A lot of people are just driving. They're just operating on like raw emotion, and Alonso's out there playing 3D chess with them and stuff. Like, we saw a glimpse of it in Australia when he was like not brake checking, when he was pace checking George, and George was like, "Oh, what do I do?" and drove off the road. Like, like, we don't even know what he does. The guy is a genius. So I think he's playing the wrong cards. He makes horrifying decisions, but
tame him and call the shots. I mean, he runs that team. I think Alonso knows it. I think he's grateful to be in a number one driver's position. Otherwise, where else is he going to have that luxury?
True, but I don't think he would lay down to Max. Not in the freaking slightest. It would be.
I think he would if he's told that if he wants to stay on the team, that he will. He'll either take number 2 and be.
No, he
I
might
mean, how much
say
money you want?
okay, but he's not going to do okay. Like, just go back to 2008.
Again,
That's-
then you're going to turn around and answer to
That's
King
seven.
Stroll in King Moneybags and be
Oh,
like,
no,
"Hey man,
the
how
outqualified
long do you
Max.
want to stay here?"
What is he going to
So-
do? Oh, I'm sorry, I outqualified Max.
I'm saying, like,
you fast enough.
well, then it would be very interesting because we would see a legit
Hell
teammate.
yeah. Hell
Like,
yeah.
I would pay money.
Yep.
This is why I want this, right? I'm projecting and hoping that Alonso would like, okay, I'll take that number 2. Sure, I want to be this driver on this
Yeah.
team with this car,
Yeah.
this newly designed car. You
Yeah.
tell me, like, no, he gets the best car on the grid,
Mhm.
right? Designed by one of the greats. Yeah, you're
Mhm.
not going to leave because you're not going to get a better car than you're
No.
getting.
But he's also not
And
going
you're going
to
to have a chance to say, I'm not saying he's going to lay down. I'm just saying he'll accept that number 2 role and then he'll show his worth. I don't think that he's going to wreck or crash or do stupid shit. I think that would come from Max. It would be Max crashing into him and losing wheel to wheel. This is why I want this though. Like, yeah. I want it.
We're agreeing.
I want it.
You're arguing, but we're agreeing.
I'm arguing because, like,
So-
I think it would be good. I think it would end up well.
No, Jay, this
I
is what
think
it's
we
like
would
for
see-
you and Rich to argue.
I think we would
Me and
see
Fabian are sitting
a
aside going,
Aston
"Shut
Martin
up."
championship. We would see an Aston Martin constructors and drivers championship, and completely disrupt what's going on right now.
Okay. So, 2 things that you forgot about, Rich. One, he's already signed that contract for the ambassador role. He is with Aston Martin for the rest of his life now. That's point 1. That would cost Aston Martin a hell of a lot of money.
What are you talking about?
He got the same deal that Lewis Hamilton did with Ferrari, where he becomes an ambassador after he retires for the brand, just like Niki Lauda was for Mercedes. They're not going to get rid of him very easily.
What are you contradicting what I said?
You're saying that if he doesn't take that second driver role, he's kicked out. Done. Bye. What I'm saying is that's not going to happen that way.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Because-
Yeah, no,
yeah.
it wouldn't, and they wouldn't do that to him. Yeah.
No. But I think what I said before about the FIA trying to push for these super teams is going to happen. They have been trying to push this now for several years. You put Alonso and Max on a team. You have Leclerc and Hamilton on a team. You have Piastri and Norris on a team. There you go. You have a fucking battle. That's not even including who Red Bull can pull up out of the stables. Because we could be seeing something whole new. Hajar just comes in, lights the fucking world on fire, and we don't know any better. You know, or hell, Antonelli could do something, or Behrman and Ocon. That could be a fucking amazing pairing, and we just don't know it yet. But I think that Lawrence Stroll, if Lance is not involved, will let Alonso and Max race it out. Straight up, because it is good for the brand. It is good for everything else. And like we said earlier, money talks. You get Aston Martin with Alonso and Max sitting there clowning on each other outside of cars and racing wheel to wheel inside of the cars. Your merchandise sales go up, your social media stuff goes up, all your sponsorships go up. There's a lot of money to come into there with those two in those cars. Now, remember, Red Bull let Checo fight Max at the beginning of 2023. And Max said one thing on the radio: I will not lose to him again. That will be the same thing that happens with Alonso if it comes down to it.
I hope not. And so I think my point with all of that and that I was trying to make was that Alonso understands the money game, right? He knows, like, I got to push, be competitive. All of this is driving. Like you say the same thing. Like he does 3D chess. Like, yeah, he understands the big holistic picture. That's why I don't think he would mind being the number 2 driver, right? And the best car on the grid. because he has a chance to outqualify, outperform Max whenever he chooses. And at the end of the day, like, what are we doing here? Making money. You know, he wants to establish his legacy. He would have a chance for, you know, his last year, one of his last seasons, to go out as a champion. I think he'd take that. I think, you know, having Max and all that sponsorship money and everything else, like, just makes the team stronger and just helps. And it creates a storyline that the FIA, the fans, and quote unquote everybody wants, you know, the super team competition. All right, we'll go around the horn one more time. Fabian, what do you got? Any closing remarks? Oh, you're muted. Muted.
I thought I would be pretty chill through this break, you know, taking some time to do some other things. I'm looking at the date, it's the 12th, and I'm going, okay, I'm getting anxious now. You know, it's been a little longer than I realized, so to speak. So I don't have any definitive predictions of any sort just yet. I am really, really interested in getting the concrete releases on Newey, on Kimi Antonelli, seeing what's going to develop with this Montalvo story. Those are three things that are going to be top of mind every day from now until the 25th, or well, at least when free practice starts. I'm really curious about that. The other thing that I'm really curious about is upgrades. I'm really, really curious about what Red Bull has been doing back on the factory side of the equation, you know, in the think tank when it comes to their packages and their upgrades. I can't imagine that they're just resting on their laurels and, you know, taking a full swing at just, you know, being in the recumbent position and sipping on margarita somewhere. I'm expecting that they're going to come out with something significant. I saw something where, you know, they said that they take responsibility for, you know, Checo's lack of performance. I don't know what that story is all about. I haven't delved into it. But when you combine their statement about, you know, bringing the upgrades and then them supposedly feeling like they had a big hand in some of Checo's problems, I'm really curious to see what Red Bull's going to do, because I don't expect them to just continue to fizzle and go away like it looks like it's headed. I mean, it looks like, you know, if everything goes the way it's been going, we're looking at a McLaren championship possibly in both categories if it continues in the path that it was going. I can't see them kowtow to that. So, you know, I got you got the Newey thing, the Antonelli thing, the Montalvo thing, and then I want to see what's going on with Red Bull's upgrades and how this is going to impact Max and Checo's performance beyond Mexico, if Checo's even still there.
So I don't think Max is in any danger of losing the Drivers' Championship. I do think Red Bull is a significant danger of losing the Constructors, unless Checo rewrites the scenario or, you know, whoever replaces him fixes what's going on. But the path they're on right now cannot sustain, and they will lose the Constructors. We are going to go ahead and wrap. Next week, we're going to talk about the 90s, and we're going to talk about other developments and whatever current events and offseason is, and we'll probably do a little bit of race preview. But yeah, thank you, gentlemen. This has been episode 3 of the Formula One Fans of America show. Thank you for joining us.
You bet. Thanks for having me.